Welcome to the first of two educational forums from the League of Women Voters of Fresno is hosting on agriculture. These forums will focus on specific aspects including economic health, animal management, and food safety. Our local league is participating in a national league study on agriculture, and in preparation for our study, we're hosting these forums for the community. My name is Jackie Canfield, and I'm a proud member of the League of Women Voters of Fresno. The League is a nonpartisan organization, which means we do not oppose or endorse any candidates. We do believe in studying issues, and when we have consensus, take action to make a difference in our community. We also believe deeply that the public should hear different views on issues facing our community in order for them to make an informed decision. All of us know that agriculture is big business in Fresno County. However, how much do we really know about how things work? Today, we will focus on the economic health of agriculture. We will hear from a panel of experts on their thoughts and topics ranging from agricultural subsidies, crop insurance, and antitrust legislation. After we hear from our panel, we will have an opportunity to ask questions of our panel members. Our panel today includes Paul Betancourt, who is a cotton grower, Jerry Pietro, who is the former Fresno County Agricultural Commissioner, and Dr. Daniel Sumner, a professor and agricultural economist at UC Davis, who will be joining us via Skype later in the program. We also would like the audience to know that Jeff Yasui from USDA Risk Management Director was planning on attending today. Unfortunately, he was informed that he could not attend today's forum. So on to our first speaker, who will be Paul Betancourt. He is a partner in the VA Farms and has been involved in agriculture since the early 1980s. He farms a variety of crops and is very active in the community, participating on many boards, including the Kerm Community Food Bank, San Joaquin Valley Air Pollution Control District, and the Central Valley Regional Water Board. He currently hosts a radio spot called The Week on the Farm on KYNO. Paul received his BA in Religious Studies at Westmont College, a BA in Agricultural Business from Fresno State University, and an MA in International Relations at Fresno State University. So we're going to listen to Paul give us his viewpoints on agriculture and how it affects our local farmers.
Well, good morning, and first off, thank you for your interest in agriculture. I'm involved every day. And sometimes it gets a little lonely out there. So we appreciate your interest on what's happening excuse me, down on the farm. First, I think it clicked that time. Is that better? Okay. It wasn't clicked. First off, I'm going to not answer your questions directly. I'll be glad to answer them later. The fundamental question for me is not the Farm Bill or the revision of the Farm Bill. The fundamental question for me is, what do we want our food policy, what do we want our agricultural policy for as a nation? And that's the bigger question. Talking about the revision to the Farm Bill is talking about what's already been in place for the better part of 80 years. And my first question is, why do we even call it a Farm Bill anymore? For every dollar spent on farm programs, $4 are spent on food programs. You know, food stamps and the EBT cards and all that goes with this. And these are important programs. I'm not minimizing that. But it's important for us to understand 80% of the Farm Bill has nothing to do with directly what happens on the farm. So again, back to the question, what should be our national food policy? For at least 80 years, we've had a de facto cheap food policy. Now this is controversial and people disagree with me on this. Vernon Crowder, I'm sure you know, is an economist and a banker, and he and I have done laps on this one. But the fact is we have a de facto food policy. We have subsidized production of major crops since the 1930s. And the subsidies are very controversial. They're on both sides of the aisle. But what the subsidies have done is artificially increased production in major crops, corn, wheat, cotton, soybeans, mohair, that, I mean, it's yeah, complicated. But when you increase supply without increasing demand, you lower the price. And so that's what we've done. We've increased supply of production of major agricultural products. Now we're switching to this idea of crop insurance. And the question is, what's crop insurance going to do? And my fundamental concern with going to crop insurance, is everybody, like I said, nobody wants to go with the crop subsidies. They're controversial. As a conservative, I have a problem with it. People think we're giving money to rich farmers, we're giving money to people who don't produce. I've heard all the controversies. But the subsidy money went to rural America. When you gave money to farmers, it went to farmers, they spent it in local communities. If we switch now to crop insurance, where's the money going to go? As far as I can tell, it's going to go to big insurance companies, and it's not going to help. It's not going to help Kerman like it did before. So that's my fundamental question. My fundamental concern. The other thing is we're going to lose this overproduction, and an example of that was 2008. In 2008, this wasn't Farm Bill policy, but because they were encouraging ethanol production in the Midwest, the price of grain around the world took off. I sold wheat for $374 a ton, a historic high price. There were food riots in third world countries because food was so expensive. But that price encouraged farmers around the world to plant wheat. And the next year, the price of wheat was $180 a ton. And that's the swings you see in agriculture without subsidies. So again, I'm not a big fan, as a conservative, I'm not a big fan of subsidies, but by taking them out, two things happen. You're going to have large swings in prices, and my concern is the money's not going to go to help rural America. Before I go to your questions, this is slightly off track, but if you're taking notes and you want to know how to help farmers in the food supply, and if you want to help increase organic production, there's a lot of interest in organic production. There's three things that I think need to be done that are fairly simple. One is support agricultural research, and that fits into your questions. There are continuing bench science, hard questions that need to be dealt with. You guys want me to use less pesticides, right? We're all good with that. I want to use less pesticides. This stuff's $500 a gallon for some of it. I don't want, I'm a big fan. But there's specific problems. We've got a plant bug out in the cotton called lygus, and it goes and stings the squares as they form, and it devastates cotton production. And the only way to kill lygus is to use a broad spectrum pesticide, which wipes out the beneficials as well as wiping out the lygus. This is bad for the environment, it's expensive, but nobody's figured out something to control lygus without a broad spectrum pesticide. So if you want to know my opinion of the number one research problem in cotton production, that's it. Second, we need to streamline the reporting. I can't tell you how much I, as a farmer, do not like doing paperwork. One of the perks of farming is not having to do paperwork. And there's more and more paperwork every year. I've got a friend named Daniel Babshoff in Kerman. He's doing exactly what people want him to do. He's got a day job. He and his wife on the side are growing organic tomatoes, and he's ready to quit because he's spending over 5 hours a week just filling out forms to certify his crop. I have another neighbor who grew his first fresh crop last year, the first time he had cherries, and he completely freaked out. 3 different organizations brought him 3-inch... Okay. It's on for him. All right. 3 different groups came out with 3-ring binders, 3-inch 3-ring binders for him to certify his crop. Now, I understand there's a reporting requirement, and that's fine. Can we get it down to 1 binder? Can we all accept the same binder? And the third thing that needs to happen, so first is research, 2, streamline the paperwork, and the third thing that would really help is shortening the timeline. There's demand and interest in organic production. The current rules on organic production is I have to take my fields out of conventional production for 3 years before I can be certified organic. I don't know about you guys, but I can't go 3 years without income. And I can't go 3 years with risky income, because I would have all the risk of organic production without having the increased income, the increased premium for organic crops. So those are the three things I think in terms of policy that would really help agriculture here in the Valley, and I think it would help nationwide. Now, to your specific questions, let's see. And again, my fundamental question is, what do we want as national food policy? To your specific questions, should government financial support for agriculture be directed to? The answers are ag research. Remember, I want to kill lygus bugs without hurting the beneficial insects. And reliable water supply. Oh shoot, it does come up, doesn't it? I promise not to talk too much about water. We'll just leave it at that until questions and answers. You know, without a reliable water supply, this all goes away. It's just that simple. What changes should government make regarding direct payment programs for farm operators? The first thing, effectively enforce. You know, we've all heard the horror stories. You know, Sam Donaldson from ABC 30 or ABC National was getting subsidies for his goats in Idaho or Montana or something. Guy's not a farmer. Let's enforce the rules and keep it to the farmers. Got people who are making their living farming. Again, you know, I understand all the concerns on subsidies, but we have this de facto cheap food policy. If you pull out the subsidies, you're going to see swings in agricultural products. And you've seen it, how about milk prices? You know, milk prices have gone up and down over the last couple of years. I remember years ago, I mean, this is March of '95, the large majority of lettuce in the country was being grown in Huron, and we got swamped with rains, and the price of lettuce tripled for a period of time. You'll see these kind of swings when you take the subsidies out. And again, the new insurance program subsidizes insurance companies instead of supporting rural America. What changes to current crop insurance programs should government make? I haven't a clue. Should government act on any of the following? Antitrust, concerns about corporate farming. Okay. This is kind of one of the boogeymen of California ag policy, the corporate farms, right? We all like this idea of ma and pa and kids with a picket fence, farming and milking the chickens, milking the cows and feeding the chickens and stuff like that. That sounds fabulous. We have a problem with that. We've got less than 2% of our population living and working on farms. My kids left the farm. I came back to the farm. I was born in New York City. I grew up in San Diego. I met a nice girl in college. We came up here to farm for a year or two, and that was in '81. People ask if my kids are interested in farming. My daughter teaches in Sanger. She just finished her master's in education. It's I don't know how to talk louder. I'm sorry. And my son, instead of farming, joined the Army knowing he'd go overseas and get shot at rather than farm, which tells you how farm kids are looking at the farm situation. It's not an option for most of them. I mean, it's tough. Now, I do see some kids are coming back to the farm because farm prices are good right now. But in terms of coming, you know, it's the idea of the small family farm with, 5 or 10 acres and a couple of goats, it's not happening. I love farming, I love living out in the country, but it's a business too, and it's got to pay for itself. And unless we get a lot of people moving back to the farms, we're going to have big farms. So the question isn't big or little farms, it's how are we going to deal with this? And I think the concern about corporate farming is misplaced. The last reports I've seen is something on the order of 3% of California farms are corporate farms in the idea of big business. Now, there are other farms that are incorporated for tax purposes, but it's small family operations still. So we're talking a very small portion of California agriculture. If you're concerned about the corporate involvement in agriculture, you need to go one step above. When we were growing tomatoes, there were 600 tomato growers, and there were 8 canneries. where do you think corporate America kicks in? Yeah. I mean, those guys are smart. They don't like risk. And as long as guys like me are willing to take all the risk, they'll put up their canneries and process all the fruit. And I'm okay with that because I can't afford to run a cannery. But in terms of antitrust, if you're worried about food supply and the corporate impact on agriculture, don't look at the farms. Look at the food processors. I forgot when we started. How am I doing?
You're doing good.
Okay. What do I need from government? My neighbor, I'll quote John in a sec. First thing I do is I wish they would all take the Hippocratic Oath, first do no harm. If you remember your Declaration of Independence, my favorite clause in there when Jefferson's lining up the things that they were complaining about King George, was he has sent forth a swarm of officers to eat out of our substance. That's basically what I feel about government agencies. I have to pay fees to pay them to police me. And you wonder why I'm not real happy with the situation. But the real answer is, what do I need from government? John Harris said it years ago. He says, we don't need handouts. We need a healthy business environment. We'll take the risks. I have a friend who's an attorney, and years ago he said, I can't believe the risks you guys take. I got to thinking about it. It's like, they're perfectly normal to me. And then I realized, to normal people, there's crazy risks. I take my retirement, everything I own, and I risk it every year to make a living. And we're okay with that. But I need a healthy business environment, and we don't have it. We need help in trade policy. We need help in environmental policy. To make a healthy business environment, then we can make the decisions. We can make the investments to produce the food that you guys consume. And I want to make sure we're clear. There is a fundamental right and responsibility of government to carry out regulation. I'm not saying no regulation. And the fundamental issue for me is, I want you and all of our customers to be confident of our food supply. I want you to be confident of the food you get to eat. And people ask me, do I think the food system's safe? It's like, of course. One kid gets sick on milk, and it's national news, isn't it? A few people get sick on the E. coli and the spinach a few years ago. It's national news. I'm not saying the system's perfect, but it's pretty responsive. My ex-son-in-law thought I was kidding when I've talked with food processors and restaurant owners, and I ask them, Cheryl and I got to go on a sister city trip to Italy, and the food in Italy is fantastic. Food's like a sacrament in Italy. So I come back and I talk to restaurant owners and chefs, and I go, what do you know about food that I don't know? And their answer was always food safety. I'm going, huh? Their number one concern as preparers of food is food safety, because they don't want to be on the news with an E. coli or a salmonella outbreak from their restaurant. And my ex-son-in-law thought I was overstating it, and he worked for a food processor for 5 months. He says, you're right. They're food Nazis. They wore polo shirts and cut the buttons off their polo shirts so the buttons wouldn't end up in the conveyor belts with the food. They are absolutely maniacal about food quality. And everybody in the industry is. From the time we plant seed to the time it ends up in your grocery store or on your restaurant plate, we want all of you to be absolutely confident that the food you get is safe and healthy and nutritious. And so we'll accept regulation that achieves that end, that pushes to that end. What we have concerns about is 3-inch binders, of repetitive forms, 5 hours of paperwork a week to certify a crop. That's the kind of stuff that we have issues with. I put please turn over and there's nothing on back. All right, that is about what I had. So, can we finish up?
Questions are at the end. Oh, we're not done yet?
I'll be back for Q&A.
Thank you so much. We will next hear from Jerry Prieto, who has been involved in agriculture his whole career. He was employed by Fresno County for over 35 years and served as Fresno County's Agriculture Commissioner for almost a decade. During his time as commissioner, he was highly praised for his leadership dealing with several pest and disease management issues. He has and does serve on several state and local boards, including the Fresno County Council of Government Farmland Conservation Committees, Fresno County Land Conservation Committee, and the Fresno County Farm Bureau. Jerry received his BA in agriculture from Fresno State University, and he's going to enlighten us on how all of the regulations and things deal from the county level on agriculture.
Can you hear me without the microphone?
No? We need the microphone for the camera.
All right. Can you hear me with the microphone?
That's for the TV.
Okay, well, I'll come up here then. And I'll probably have to walk back and get my crutches. Well, first of all, let me just state that you live in a wonderful agricultural production area. You won't find this area, and when I say the area, I really talk about the San Joaquin Valley as a whole. You won't find it any place else in the world. It doesn't exist. Now, I say that with confidence, even though I've never traveled anywhere in the world. I haven't traveled to any third world countries, except for Arizona. I've been there one time. But I know this from people who do travel. And the horror stories they tell me when they come back about food safety, and my experience with food coming from other countries. And if I can tell you that I don't buy food that I only know is produced in China, I won't do it. Canned food, I won't buy it. You know, elderly people go and buy a lot of canned goods from the dollar stores and Dollar General. It's almost all packaged and processed in China. My mother-in-law used to do this. First thing we did when she came to live with us, we cleaned out her pantry, threw everything from China away, and she really was kind of ticked off at us for throwing away her food, but we told her, you know, it's not worth the risk. Now, getting back to Fresno County's agriculture, you know, we consistently have had about 6,000 farms. It's been that way for years. We consistently have irrigated about 1 million acres. Even though we've had this transformation from agriculture to some type of development, non-ag, we still have about 1 million irrigated acres. Our average size of a farm is less than 300 acres. I think it's like 269 acres is the average size. Does that surprise anyone here? Majority of our farms are small farms. As you travel around the county and see the wonderful grapes that grow throughout the county, that average grape farmer farms about 40 acres. That's it. The average age of our farmers is consistently climbing up. I think right now we're probably pretty close to 60 years old. Now, I saw some preliminary numbers from the latest census the other day, and I don't recall where I read them because I couldn't find them again. But the age had climbed up nationwide. It's now 63 years is the average age of a farmer. Now, if you have some time someday, travel around, drive around to our places where we grow grapes. If you see someone driving a tractor, spend the time to look at that individual. More than likely, that person is going to be over 70 years old driving that tractor. Why? Well, he doesn't have a 401k, doesn't have a defined benefit from any government agency for retirement. His land is his retirement. That's all he has. And unless you live on the edge of a city and you have the opportunity to sell to someone who's willing to give you more money than you've seen at one time in your entire life, the chances are you're going to be stuck with that farm. And you have to farm it in order to maintain your income. Now, you could maybe sell it to another farmer, But all that went away just recently because of water. Now, without water, your land isn't worth as much as it was, say, 6 years ago. And now, you're going to go try to get a loan to make your crop this year. The bank is going to ask you, how are you going to keep your crop alive? Do you have a well on your property? Do you get FID water, Consolidated Irrigation District water, or any other irrigation districts in the county? And this year the answer is going to probably be, well, no, I'm not getting water from the irrigation district. I've got a well, but it started sucking air a month ago. I'm going to get it repaired, but they're telling me it's going to take 8 months. If you're a banker, you're going to spend your money on this individual? Farming, as Paul said, is very risky. I'm a very small farmer, only because I have to have a tie back to agriculture. I can't really live without agriculture in my life. I grew up on a farm. I have 9 acres that I have just east of the airport. I don't have an ag well. I use my domestic home well to irrigate what I grow. And it's only, well, I'd say, just short of a quarter of an acre that I produce commodities on. I grow tomatoes. I grow cantaloupe, squash, cucumbers, watermelons, and pumpkin. Those are my big crops. Last year, I became an official USDA designated farmer. I made in excess of $1,000. So I am an official farmer now. I have a few head of cattle, just a very few. I have 6 head right now. Used to have 15 when I first moved there 13 years ago. But we've had a consistent water problem in those 13 years where it's gotten good one year, gotten bad next year. At one point, I was paying $14 a bale for hay, and it made it unprofitable for me to maintain my 15 head. I got rid of half of them. And so I have the ones I have now. But today, if I go out and buy a bale of alfalfa, I'm going to be paying between $16 to $17 a bale. I've been notified that I probably won't get any irrigation water this year for my pasture, which means in about a month and a half, my pasture will be dry again. It just got green last week. And so I've been feeding my cattle since September, $400 a month it cost me for hay. That was at $9 a bale. So I'm just a small micro farmer, but it gives you an idea what the folks out there are facing. And it takes a lot of courage to do what they do. Now, agriculture is highly regulated. Don't let anyone tell you it's a non-regulated industry. It is very regulated. I know, I used to be the regulator, at least one of them. And when I started my career with Fresno County, my office was the only office that the farmers really had to worry about. We were the ones that they used to hate until they had to start dealing with the Regional Water Quality Control Board, the Air Pollution Control District, just the various other agencies that are now involved with regulating what you do. I irrigate my pasture, so now I have to either hire an engineer to come up with a plan on how I'm not going to pollute the groundwater, or I join a coalition. I chose to join a coalition who hires an engineer who does all that to determines how we're not going to contaminate the groundwater. And my water is usually very clean. I grow at great lengths. I am, I think, what most farmers are in this area. I'm concerned about our environment. I'm concerned about the quail that are living around me, the cottontails, the jackrabbits, the coyotes, the red-tailed hawks. I enjoy watching those things, and so my irrigation water leaves my property. I'll admit that right now. It's a violation of a law for it to leave my property. It cannot leave my property. Even though it's clear pump water, if I was using clear pump water, if it leaves my property onto adjacent property, I am in violation of a law. But I intentionally let it go sometimes because I want to keep the berry patch behind me green, because in that berry patch, the quail live, the cottontails live, the various songbirds live, and depend upon that berry patch. Without it, they leave my area and go someplace else. So I have a green strip that my water goes through, so that green strip can capture some of the nutrients as it passes through. So I'm not over, I don't want to use the word polluting, because I don't believe I am, but I'm not overburdening that location with any of the nutrients. I don't fertilize my pasture at all. I figure the cows are doing a pretty good job at that. I go through it once a year or twice a year, and I drag it to break up all the manure, and that's what I use. I don't fertilize my vegetable plot because I think it has plenty of nitrogen in it. I don't use a lot of pesticides. I tried being an organic farmer because, you know why? I wanted to get more money for my commodity. That first year I didn't get any money because I didn't have a crop. See, I live in a riparian area, and from that riparian area came all of these little bugs. And I was trying to grow brassica and cucurbits. They love viruses, or the viruses love them, either way. So I didn't have a crop. So the following year, I treated all of my trees that attracted all the bad bugs, so when they landed on them, they would die and leave my crops alone. And that seems to be working fairly well for me. But in my career, I have seen our agriculture in the county change. We used to do a lot of field crops and row crops. But as we started competing in the world market, the money wasn't there for those things. And as Paul said, farming is a business. You have to make money in order to stay in business. So we started going to more tree fruit crops and more nut crops. And early in the 70s, people were being criticized for using subsidized water on cotton. Cotton wasn't a food crop. It was just, didn't need to have that done. So we've gone mainly now to what are almost all food crops being irrigated with our water. And we've created kind of a problem for ourselves because now our water needs are hardened, and it's difficult to see your investment. What's it cost? About $25,000 an acre to put in drip in your trees and everything for like an almond tree?
Only $1,200.
Only $1,200 an acre. So at any rate, there's a huge investment there. And you have to protect it if you want to stay in business. The field crop guys, row crop guys, they just stop irrigating. But they're not going to make any money. Fresno County used to be the lettuce capital of the world during 2 periods of the year, March and November. We're not going to have lettuce this year on the west side. It's just not going to happen. We probably won't have any of the others like broccoli. Just not going to happen. And the other thing about the west side is people talk about Westlands Water District and how that we shouldn't be using them because the ground is tainted with salt. We have high water tables. Well, Westlands is a huge district, and only part of it is impacted by high water table. And most of that land has already been set aside. It started being set aside, oh gosh, I would say about 15 years ago. So we have over 200,000 acres now that really don't farm anything. They try putting on barley or some grain crop, and which mainly because I am the person that drove them to do things like that. They used to leave it just barren. But that created problems with what we call refugia for insect pests. And so those insect pests, the ligas, would leave those weeds as soon as the cotton was planted and just go have a good time in the cotton fields. So I had to come up with a solution. So I said, you have to, in your contracts, if you're going to have somebody plant barley, you have to have in your contract that they got to disc it immediately once your crop is up, or sheeped off, whatever. And if you're not doing that, then you have to treat it, because we can't have this huge refugia for all these insect pests. The other thing I tell about our agriculture is very diversified. Used to say 200 crops and started working. Then they went to 250. Well, now I think we're over 375 crops now, mainly because of the introduction of Asian farmers. Asian farmers have really brought another perspective and diversity we never had before. They can grow crops that I've never heard of. I don't know what they do with them. You ask them, what do you do? Well, we stir, we fry, and okay, we boil. But they have also created a problem for us. A huge problem, and it was up until Vietnam War, these folks didn't have an alphabet. When they came here, most of them couldn't read or write. I remember I was assigned to help educate them on how to farm in California. Well, first of all, we had to teach them how to read, and so we had a lot of people helping them. We got that reading part done. Then we had to convince them that they couldn't use certain pesticides because they're too dangerous. That took years. But we used to have a lot of them being poisoned because they would use these very hazardous pesticides on backpack sprayers. And so we finally got them to use tractors. Well, today they're doing a wonderful job, and they're doing what, let's say, the Japanese did, and who first came here, the Europeans who first came here. The new groups that always come, they're there right now. They're that new group, and they're doing very, very, very well. I don't know what else to tell you. I can talk about my experience with government. Paul mentioned the fees. I was told when I was a department head, charge them as much as you can. Them was the industry. I said, well, yeah, I can only legally charge them what my costs are. No, charge them as much as you can. I said, I can't do that. And I won't tell you who these supervisors were. It's not important anymore. They're not in office. I had a very difficult time about doing things like that. And so I wouldn't. And I remember being chastised by someone who said, well, you're costing the county a lot of money. And because of you, we're not going to provide some services. And it wasn't a board member. That was someone in the Auditor Controller's office. And, I just didn't think that was right. A fee for the work you do is fine, but you should never charge someone more than what it cost you. I remember in the board telling people, well, I just think that's a hidden tax. And the board member questioned what I was trying to say. I said, I think it's a hidden tax. That's what I mean. And that was before I was retiring. I could tell that my time was running short. And so it's always good to retire when you're on the high point rather than on the low point. But my frustration was growing with the government. I don't know if you folks work for government or ever had any frustrations with them. I have. And that's why I think that you need to recognize that the agriculture is really one of your best resources. I think that our farmers do a very good job. Not all of them. I think they do a very good job of protecting the resources, and they do a good job about conservation. And you should feel fortunate and confident that your food is safe. Most of the problems have always been from outside. Vegetables, we've had the leafy vegetables he mentioned earlier. Cantaloupes has always been from the outside, Mexico mainly. We never had an incident with cantaloupes in California. We had, I think, last year from someplace in Texas. But California has a very good mechanism for controlling their pesticides. The problems on cantaloupes with any of the I lost my train of thought now. E. coli, and what's the other one that's endemic everywhere? Salmonella. That's mainly what they've been trying to do for years, and they've been very good at it. The other thing is organic versus conventional growing. We have 37,000 acres now of organic farmers in Fresno. And how many of you think that organic means you don't use pesticides? That organic means you don't use pesticides. Okay, well, I'm glad most of you are educated. Organic means you use organically approved pesticides. And there's a whole list. There's hundreds and hundreds of them. That doesn't mean everyone uses them, just like doesn't mean every conventional farmer uses pesticides, but they're there for use. I read an interesting article trying to control weeds now with eucalyptus oil. You're going to cut me off. Okay, great. But we used to sample food crops in Fresno County on a regular basis, just before they were harvested. Those were sent in and did analysis for pesticide residue. We used to find it maybe on about 2%, and it was always within the approved limits. And it was such a good program because you always point to it. Your food is okay. Your food doesn't have pesticides. Well, the state government said, well, it's a waste of money because we don't find anything, so it's a waste of money. So I fought along with the Ag Commission from Kings County, and we couldn't stop them from taking the program away. So they don't sample anymore for that. And that's a problem, I think, because we could always point to that and say, regardless of how it's grown, the food doesn't have any pesticide residues on it. So that's something to think about. Oh, and one last thing. The issue of subsidies, we've been looking at the growers, but I'm particularly concerned about ethanol. We subsidize the processors of corn to make ethanol. And that has driven all this planting in the Midwest of corn, eating up millions of acres of grassland in the Midwest, land that was never, ever plowed before. And it's all because of ethanol subsidies. If they take away the subsidy for making ethanol, not the corn growing, which is not there anymore anyway, but if they remove that subsidy and just let it just play the world market, lower the tariffs from ethanol coming in from Brazil, then that it can become just a market decision. Let the market decide. And that will help slow how much of this grasslands we're losing in the Midwest. Now, California Farm Bureau has been promoting this for quite some time, but we know we're just talking to the California farmers and ourselves because we have the whole Midwest to deal with. That's it.
Lastly, we are going to hear from Dr. Daniel Sumner. He is professor in the Department of Agriculture and Resource Economics at UC Davis and the director of University of California Agricultural Issues Center. He has held varying agricultural-focused positions in both the academic and government agencies, including Assistant Secretary for Economics at the United States Department of Agriculture, where he has been involved in policy formation and analysis on a whole range of topics facing agriculture. He received his bachelor's in agriculture management from Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, his master's from Michigan State, a PhD in economics from the University of Chicago. He has been honored for his work in agricultural policy and his writings that focus primarily on the consequences of farm and trade policy in agriculture and on the economy. And I'd like to thank you for joining us Skype. We really appreciate it. And I'm going to turn it over to you. I understand you're going to help us fill in for our speaker from the USDA who was not able to talk to us today a little bit about crop insurance too.
Yes, I'll get to crop insurance
Thank
towards the
you.
end. First, let me thank the technology people that make this feasible, even for those of us that aren't experts. Can everyone hear me fine? Someone in the front row, put a thumb up if you can hear me. All right, thanks a lot. And I really wish I could be there. I teach a class called the Economics of Sustainable Agriculture. We'll meet this afternoon, so I really couldn't get down there today myself in person, but I'm glad this works. I've been working on farm bills for about 30 or 40 years, depending on how you count it. And that's a lot of farm bills, 8 or 9 of them. They happen every 4, 5, 6 years. Sometimes they're delayed like this one. Congress sets a bunch of deadlines and then they don't feel bound to follow their own deadlines. That's standard, we're used to it. It's been going on with farm bills since before the Reagan administration. So when this farm bill was known for years as the 2012 Farm Bill. Well, was signed by the president a few weeks ago, so that tells you they were a couple of years behind schedule. For really a generation, the farm bills have been 1,000 pages or more, what in Washington is called omnibus legislation. Next to that 1,000 pages of law are hundreds and hundreds of other pages called the manager's report that have almost the force of law, and then it's turned over to an agency, in this case mostly the U.S. Department of Agriculture, where they put together thousands upon thousands of pages of regulations that then implement that law. This farm bill itself follows the pattern. There's a dozen or so titles covering everything from food stamps to rural development. They call it nutrition. There's an international title that deals mostly with international food aid. There's a farm credit title. There's an environment and something they call the conservation title. The famous one for years and years, going back, frankly, to the New Deal in 1933, when most of this started, is Title I, where they put much of the commodity program subsidy. So I'm going to start there. Let me first say that the part I'm going to talk about least is about 75 or 80 billion dollars a year that's spent on food stamps in the nutrition title. The Farm Bill authorizes and in fact requires spending on a particular kind of food assistance, the food stamp program, not school lunch, not the women, infants, and children, and a bunch of other nutrition things that USDA does, not regulation of food safety. Though that's all different legislation, but the Farm Bill does fund the food stamp program, and it is by far the dominant part of the budget. And it's mandatory spending. The Farm Bill sets the rules, and then whatever happens to the economy, recession, the program costs a lot more. If the economy starts booming again, the program will cost less, but it's estimated to be about $80 billion a year or something in that range. That's about all I'm going to say about it. After 2 years of incredible controversy, we have a business as usual food stamp program that changes almost nothing. So they fought to a stalemate and changed almost nothing. Many details change, but for our purposes today, it's roughly the same $80 billion going to roughly the same people, and it's a welfare program for the very poor. It frankly has almost nothing to do with food. It's administered almost like a cash transfer, and that's the way we ought to think about it. We ought to think about it. You like it if you want to take taxpayer money and help some of the very poorest people in the United States. If you think we spend too much on that stuff, you won't like the food stamp program. And that was really the nature of the debate in Washington, D.C. There's a different debate that academics and people that look at these things in a more sort of a arm's length sort of a way, and that's the question: why in the world is this program in the Farm Bill at all? Why would you put $80 billion of help for very, very poor people, most of whom are urban, into a Farm Bill? It's a historical accident, goes back to the 1970s, and it's a matter of political log rolling, if you will, not a matter of anything of intellectual consistency or any particular reason that these are in the same piece of legislation. With that, let me turn to the farm part of the Farm Bill. And I'm not going to deal with all 11 titles that deal with farm and rural issues. There's a whole title called Rural Development that funds things not for farmers particularly, but for rural communities, small communities scattered around the country, many of those communities are quite wealthy. So a few years ago there was a scandal because Vail, Colorado, one of the most wealthy communities in the country, was getting lots of subsidy for telephone service. That was the nature of rural subsidies for telephones. Vail, Colorado qualified as a small town in rural America, and it obviously made a bit of a scandal when that hit. But that title is full of what by the rest of the bill standards are very small, only millions and millions of dollars, not billions and billions. So we consider those small programs. And in that sense, the rural title is much like other parts of the bill. There's a little something for everybody. so that when this goes through Congress, they sweeten the pot for everybody who has a particular interest or a constituency. If you don't like those people, you call them special interests. If you do like them, you say, that's you and me. And because many of what's called special is usually a good word until you get to Washington. And then special interest is somebody we don't like because that means it's the other guy. Now, I'm not going to defend those programs. Many of them are things that most of us in this room, or in these two rooms, I should say, probably wouldn't like, but they are a part of what goes out to sweeten things, so that there'll be some subsidy that if you dug into it, you'd find out it was mostly to help some people in a certain part of Nebraska. If you find some other things, you may find that, for example, there are some features in this farm bill related to the California drought, and you'd say, if you were living in Nebraska, you'd say, well, gee, that seems like a pretty special interest to me. The biggest thing on the commodity side that this farm bill did was remove a program that was considered a great reform in 1996, the so-called direct payments. And I want to give you a little bit of, that's gotten universally bad press. That is, removing the program itself got bad press. Removing it is about the only thing that's got universally good press, except among economists. I like to call this a program that only an economist could love. Because what it did, back in the 1990s, we had a bunch of programs that said, if you grow corn, the government's going to tell you exactly how many acres, you have to leave some of your corn land idle, and we're going to give you money to get you to grow corn, even if we have too much corn. And in fact, at that time, the price of corn was $2 a bushel or less. Everybody thought that was a disastrously low price. And still, we had a program that took taxpayer money and paid people only if they grew corn. And the same thing for cotton and soybeans and rice and the other sort of big broadacre commodity crops. Not the fruits and vegetables or the sort of things that we specialize in. So some clever person came up with the idea, and it wasn't me, but it was some friends of mine, and said, rather than make these people grow crops that nobody really wants to buy, why don't we say, look, politically, for one reason or another, we've decided that there are a group of people we want to transfer some money to, for good reasons or bad, but politically it's important to transfer the money to them. Just give them the money, and don't make them grow cotton if there's too much cotton in the market. Let them switch to growing alfalfa if they want to, or let them growing corn. Maybe there'll be a shortage of corn. So I explain it that way, it sort of makes sense. Politically, we need to give them the money. We've got, in fact, economically, we're actually screwing up the markets. Why don't we let them switch to alfalfa if they want to? For example, there in the Central Valley where the dairy industry was booming, people continue to get the so-called cotton subsidy, even though they switched to silage and alfalfa to help the dairy industry expand. In that sense, it makes sense. The problem with it is you're giving subsidy to people called a cotton subsidy or called a corn subsidy, and they haven't grown that crop for 15 years. And now you're sitting there writing an editorial for the New York Times or the LA Times, and you say, this doesn't make any sense. We're subsidizing for something they're not even doing. Of course, that was the whole idea of the program, was to subsidize them and not force them to do something that was damaging the economy. That got lost in the translation. This year they got rid of that program, $5 billion a year, $5 billion with a B, spent on that. That was actually a small share of the total that we had been spending in the 1980s and 90s on making them grow particular crops. That money didn't go back to the taxpayer. Don't think it went back into your pocket as either lower deficit or lower taxes. It was reoriented pretty much to go to the same people, but now they have to go back to growing the crops. So we're back into the business of having Washington tell people what to grow. And that's the major thing that people are calling reform in this bill. I tend to not use the word reform. I'll talk about a change. If you like something, you call it a reform. If you don't like it, you call it something else. And if it's neutral, I'll just call it a change. So that was one change in this farm bill that was fairly important. For those other big commodities, the ones that we tend not to grow in California, there were lots of incredibly detailed wrinkles, but for the most part, it's business as usual. And so I'm not going to go into all the details about where did they set the loan rate for corn? It used to be $2 a bushel, now it's $3.70 a bushel, and I can't remember the number for wheat or soybeans. But all of it, that stuff is very important if you're a soybean grower. So everybody in the room who's a soybean grower, please raise your hand. That's what I thought. If I was giving this talk in Illinois, they'd probably run me out of the room and tell me it should be somebody from the University of Illinois who really knows soybeans. But that would have been a different response. Everybody in the room would have raised their hand, and we would have gone into great detail about the soybean program. But we don't have to do that. So let's move on. Two programs I do want to talk about to give you a flavor of the kind of details that are here, just so that you know how things work. The cotton program, we still grow a few 100,000 acres of cotton there in the Central Valley. Maybe not this year with the drought. Cotton's one of the things people are going to cut out because of the drought. To be able to move that water to almonds and pistachios and other things, grapevines. But the cotton program has been important in California and is still important worldwide. It's one of the places where the United States has gotten a bad rap, frankly, because we subsidize a cotton industry that then competes with African cotton growers and others. So a lot of people have been mad at the U.S. about that. The cotton program is no longer a price support. It no longer makes payments directly to growers based on the price of cotton specifically. What it does do is subsidize a revenue program they call stacks, that if you grow cotton and your prices are lower or your yields are lower relative to your county average, you and I as taxpayers top up the revenue of that cotton grower. So a cotton grower in Fresno County, if the county average price and yield is down below some sort of average revenue per acre in the county, then you as a cotton grower will get a payment. And those payments can be up, for a large cotton grower, they may be hundreds of thousands of dollars, but that's some part of their revenue. And there's lots of details there, and there are triggers on the price and the yield, but it's really a revenue assurance program that goes to cotton farmers, and that was replaced. That replaces all the other complicated subsidies that they had been giving. But it's pretty much the same amount of money. It's designed to be about the same amount of money going to essentially the same people in a somewhat different form. And in fact, commodity prices, and this is a background fact we should all have in our pocket going into this, starting about 2007, commodity prices, it was a little bit different for each commodity, but whether it's rice or cotton or corn or soybeans or wheat, all of those prices jumped up over that period. And those of you that were paying attention to things then, there were all kinds of headlines on all the newspapers, on the nightly news, about potential food riots around the world, because this is a worldwide global phenomenon. The people in the Philippines were worrying about having enough rice and how expensive it was. And the price of corn, for example, had been around $2, $2.50 a bushel. It jumped up to $5 at first, then over to $7 a bushel and more, drove the Fresno County dairy industry and the Tulare County dairy industry nuts, because half their costs were these feed prices. So they were in terrible shape. But the grain farmers and the cotton farmers along with them made a whole bunch of money during that period. And those prices have stayed high. They're not now quite as high as they were a couple of years ago, but they've still really stayed incredibly high by historical standards. And one thing this farm bill does is jack up the price guarantees closer to the current market realities. They sort of re-up where we used to say, I'm using corn as an example, we used to say to corn growers, here's a guarantee of $2. Now if you were to say that, they'd say there's no chance that that guarantee is worth anything. We've upped that guarantee to closer to $4. Well, the market price is still above 4, so it may or may not kick in, but now it's a real feasible guarantee on price. And we've done similar things on the revenue for cotton. So as we've guaranteed the per acre revenue on a county by county basis, we're using the most recent few years as the average. We're not going back to 2002 when prices were low. we're doing this in a recent average, promising farmers that their revenue won't fall below what our legislatures have determined was an appropriate revenue per acre for cotton. Cotton is also one of the crops that is benefits from crop insurance, and I'm going to get back to that at the end. Just as a little foreshadow, they call it the stacks program for cotton because it's stacked on top of crop insurance. So it's a little a memory aid, if you will. This is the program that's stacked on top of the crop insurance. The other program I want to talk about specifically is the dairy program. Dairy is the only, we don't have a chicken program, or we don't have an egg program, or we don't have a beef program or a pork program, but we do have a dairy program. We have forever, meaning 1933 or so. It's incredibly complicated. One half of it, fortunately, I'm not going to talk about because it's not in the Farm Bill. The so-called milk marketing orders, we have a separate one from the federal system here in California. It's run by the California Department of Food and Agriculture. It's not a part of the Farm Bill. Incredibly controversial in Sacramento. Lots of people from there in the South Valley are up in Sacramento all the time at hearings, beating on the door of the Secretary of Agriculture here in this state, Karen Ross, wanting to get changes in that policy. But not part of the Farm Bill. It's off the table for today's discussion, fortunately, because it would take too long to try to explain. What the federal dairy policy used to have was a price support that said 100 weight of milk, that's about 8 gallons. 100 weight of milk has to be supported at the farm level at about $10. And the federal government did that by buying milk powder, butter, and cheese at some stated prices. Well, it turns out, partly because the feed prices went up, milk prices went up too. $10, nobody, not the most efficient dairy farmer in Fresno County could live on a $10 100 price. So it's irrelevant. So what we've done now is eliminate that price support program altogether. We no longer have price supports. The government's no longer going to be out there buying cheese to put in big warehouses. That's gone. We also eliminated another program that had the clever name MILC. You can pronounce that. Most people called it the milk program. It stood for Market Incentive Program for Contracts or something. It didn't much matter what the words were. Everybody called it milk. And it was a payment program to individual farmers if the price got a little low or the revenue got a little below what the standards were. We've replaced that with something called an MPP. You don't need to know what that stands for, but it protects or provides a kind of crop insurance for milk revenue. So what they do is they say, in this case, it's a margin. So it says, we will guarantee the farms the difference between the milk price and the feed price. Remember a minute ago I said their problem there was that the feed prices went up like crazy and the farmers had some sort of price support, but it didn't help them anymore because the real problem was on the feed side. So now what we've done is promise them that margin, if it falls below about $7 per 100 weight of milk, the margin between the milk price and the feed it costs to make that milk, the taxpayer steps in to pay the difference. Farmers have to sign up for that, and they have to pay a nominal premium. But I say nominal, it's real money. But it's a very small share of the total budget cost. So that's going to, if that kicks in, it'll start costing the taxpayer billions of dollars. But it probably won't kick in, or it won't kick in every year for the next 5 years. So that's an issue. So this margin insurance is like a crop insurance, but it's on the difference between revenue and costs. With that, let me turn to crop insurance as I promised I would. What we do with, and that one's easy. Crop insurance didn't change in this Farm Bill. Despite all the headlines and all the urban newspapers, it's business as usual for crop insurance. Little bitty changes here and there. So again, if you were actually growing carrots, they may have changed a little something about the carrot crop insurance program. Or if you were worried about what they're now going to provide for dryland wheat versus irrigated wheat, you might want to pay attention to the details. Crop insurance costs the taxpayer $10 or $12 billion a year, more when there's bad weather that's widespread, less when there's not. It comes in three forms. We pay 60% of the premium on average for farmers. So if you want to sign up, it costs the farmer something, but the taxpayer covers 60% of that premium. That's subsidy number one. Subsidy number two, we pay all the administrative costs for the insurance companies. So they're private companies. The taxpayer's not selling the insurance, a private insurance company does, but we pay their costs. So that makes the premiums lower because the insurance company's administrative and overhead sort of costs we're covering. And then finally, you and I as taxpayers, cover any kind of excess costs, excess indemnities that the crop insurance has. That's called reinsurance. And those of you that are insurance executives know more about this than I do, but every insurance company buys insurance. They want insurance to cover if something really bad happens in a widespread sort of a way. And in this case, the federal government stands behind something called the Risk Management Agency, stands behind the insurance companies saying if you have big losses like they had in the Midwest drought in 2012, the taxpayer will stand behind you and pick up the tab for that. So those are the three subsidies. They're still there. The changes are really details. They really go on pretty much as usual. The difference about crop insurance is it actually covers some of the fruits and vegetables. Most of them don't participate. Almost all the liability for crop insurance is corn, wheat, soybeans, cotton, those sort of things, the crops. But it's based on mostly revenue, certain amount of yield insurance, but it's mostly, again, guaranteeing farm revenue, which is a combination of price and yield. So let me stop there. We could spend another 4 hours talking about the other 10 titles of the Farm Bill, but we won't unless you have some questions.
Okay, well, we thank you, Dr. Sumner. That was a very good introduction to Economics 101 from an agricultural perspective. So now we have an opportunity for the audience to ask questions of any of our panel members. And so would someone like to, and speak clearly and loudly if you can?
I have a question for Paul. You were talking about the subsidies, and you said actually the rural farmers are only getting 2% of subsidies. How much does the corporate farm get in subsidies? What percentage?
I don't remember saying that exactly, but I don't know how to answer that question. That's a statistical question. I don't have the details on it. There are some big farms getting big subsidies.
Okay, so you don't know what percentage of big farms?
Yeah, we have some data on that, and it changes a little bit in this farm bill, but not very much. What determines your subsidy is what you grow. So if you're a dairy farmer, you're eligible for very large subsidies under this margin program I just described. But if you're a lettuce grower, there's nothing. If you're a carrot grower, there's nothing. Some of the commodity kind of programs, for example, for cotton, have some limits. So the biggest cotton growers aren't a part of the program at all. Boswell, for example, gave up on farm subsidies a long time ago. They grow a kind of cotton, Pima or extra long staple, that's not a part of the cotton program. And one reason they went to that is because they weren't going to get anything out of the cotton program, and so they decided to get out of it. Now, I don't want to run this past the Farm Bill, but when we talk about subsidies in general, we can start talking about irrigation, water, and all kinds of other things. That broadens it way past the Farm Bill. You mentioned farmers in other countries. European farmers still get subsidies. Theirs are more like the program we just got rid of. They have something more like the direct payments. So it doesn't depend on what you grow, it's just a subsidy for being a farmer. But most of the agriculture in the world is in pretty poor countries. So even though the Indian government may want to support their farmers, and they do that in various ways, they just don't have the budget to do it. And if 80% of your population, or in their case, 40% of the population are farmers, you really can't tax 60% to subsidize the 40%. Here where we've got maybe a half of 1% of the population are actually commercial farmers rather than operating as a part-time or a hobby business. We can take a tax on 99% of the rest of us and pass it out to the people that are on the farm. But the subsidy is based on what you grow, not how big the farm is.
Another question?
The booklet for today notes that among the risks that's faced in the industry is the question of availability of labor. As a former Easterner, I always thought the farmer and Republicans being together. And yet now I'm here, I see problems involving the House and the immigration bill, where they just want to take care of the border. So I wonder if you could touch on this. Where is the power of the farmer in regard to getting the labor that you need? Where are you? How much pressure are you putting on your congressman? Can you bring us up to date on the farmer and the politician? Are they compatible?
How many hours do I get for that?
How about 2 minutes?
In terms of political power, farmers have been losing political power since the Voting Rights Act in '65, because one man, one vote, and we're less than 1% of the population. We're out on all of this stuff. Second, you're describing an obvious civil war going on in the Republican Party, and they need to sort that out. A lot of farmers here are fairly conservative, but that doesn't necessarily hold nationwide. Third thing in terms of labor is, in spite of the fact that we think of farm labor being cheap labor, it is such an expensive part of so much production that it is motivation to mechanize everything possible. So you look at raisin production. 30 years ago we had 50,000 migrant raisin pickers come through the area for 6 or 8 weeks, and then they were gone. Now we've gone to mechanical harvesters. They cost $200,000 a piece plus, but you can have 2 guys or a crew of 4 or 6 guys harvest a field where before you would have needed 150 people to harvest a field. So as the cost of labor goes up, mechanization is taking over every possible. So the pool of migrant labor, the demand for migrant labor is going down.
What kind of bill do you want? Do you want a guest labor bill?
We need both. I mean, we need border security. This is post 9/11, but we need a reliable labor supply, just like we need a reliable water supply. So we need to legitimize, we need to stabilize the workforce and bring them out from under the shadows. So I've gotten in trouble with my neighbors by saying, yeah, we need immigration reform, and we need it a long time ago, not now. We need it as soon as possible. And it even plays into the Affordable Care Act. We did that to get insurance coverage for 40 million people, and the 10 to 12 million undocumented people in the country don't qualify for care under the Affordable Care Act. And so we've left out 1/4 of the people we were trying to help, and nobody's addressing that issue.
Well, just
All right. I'm sorry, go ahead.
from not being someone who hires people, I stay small, so I don't have to hire anybody. In 2007, California, or Fresno County, needed 52,000 workers to do our harvesting and our growing of our commodities. So we've been trying, for the last about 20 years now to get this reformed. We're not having much success, but in the meantime, we're increasing our border security, especially since post 9/11. So now where we used to have people come and work for a while, they'd go back home and then they'd come back. They don't do that anymore. The ones that went back, a lot of them just stayed because they don't want to run that gauntlet of possibly getting arrested or injured or killed. And there's a group who stayed here because they didn't want to run that gauntlet going home. And so we have some workers here who really are here not so much by choice, because they feel rather trapped now. The other component of that is that we have a lot of people in the local areas who are unemployed. But we can't convince those folks to do that kind of labor anymore. It's too difficult. I did it as a child, as a young man. My father was a migrant farm worker. It's very, very hard work. And so we have a difficulty now convincing people that they should be out there doing that kind of work. At the same time, we have communities whose entire livelihood depends on agriculture. You leave Fresno City, you go to any of the communities on the east side, communities on the west side, the majority of those folks work on the farm. And if they don't have the crops to harvest or to raise, they're going to be suffering terribly. And if you ever worked in a food line, you'll just understand how terrible that suffering is.
I see Dr. Summer nodding his head, so I don't know if that means he wants to comment.
So let's move on to another question.
That's on a different topic. Do you have a question?
Yes, to go back to the Farm Bill, you're saying that essentially, with a few tweaks, it's unchanged, will cost us taxpayers more or less the same as it's been costing in recent years, and the crop insurance has been more for headlines in newsletters and not so much any great change in crop insurance. Is that right?
That's right. You know, if you're a legislator in Washington, you don't put out a press release that says business as usual. Nobody does that. But I think for those of us, again, unless you were growing a particular crop in a particular place, you're not going to notice the difference. It's the same 10 or $15 billion, depending on the weather, going to pretty much the same folks over the next 5 years of this Farm Bill as over the last. I must say, the Farm Bill doesn't even, the authorizing legislation for crop insurance is a different piece of legislation. So the Farm Bill didn't authorize anything really about crop insurance except a few details around the edges. So you will hear, whether it's on the House side with a Republican chairman or on the Senate side with Senator Stabenow from Michigan, they will have, and already have, put out press releases talking about what a revolutionary bill they were. And I don't want to minimize the effort they put into it. They worked like, and their staff were there night and day for months trying to get something through, and it was considered a success when it got through because how many other bipartisan things have gotten through this Congress in recent years. So it was a massive piece of legislation that did actually get passed. And if you want to call success actually getting something passed, no matter what's in it, that feels like a success. But so this is not to say they didn't work hard, they tried real hard. But what I am going to say is that at the time all the different pieces worked out what they wanted, you ended up with a piece of legislation that looked a heck of a lot like the one we started with.
Very interesting.
Let me just say one thing on immigration. It is on the mind, I'd say water and immigration are the two issues for California that are the big headlines, more than the Farm Bill, really. I was just with a bunch of agriculturalists, some of the large farms, just recently, and boy, the labor issue for them and the water issues are just absolutely crucial. So I'm glad you're having a conversation about those issues as well.
I have a question. Paul referred to a healthy business environment, and I'd like him to define what he means by a healthy trade policy in particular.
Part of past farm bills has been subsidizing trade, and even outside the subsidies for trade is having things like NAFTA and future trade agreements. 85% of the almonds I grow are shipped overseas. 80% of the cotton I grow is shipped overseas. So trade is a big, big, big deal here in the Valley. But we compete against people who don't have the same regulatory structure we do. When I was in India and Pakistan, they're paying their people $2 and $3 a day. You think I'm underpaying my guys, paying them $10 an hour. And so these crops, these major crops especially, are global commodities. I compete on a global marketplace for selling my crops, and I have California prices, and I'm competing against California production prices, competing against somebody with third world production prices. and I just need some help, marketing the crops and keeping the regulatory costs down. We're willing to do the work, make the investment, and make it happen here. But I can't, I need, and that's why I said earlier, I wish they'd take the Hippocratic Oath, first do no harm. I'd do much better if they would just stop hurting me, and I don't need as much help as just if they'd stop hurting me with the regulatory costs. So that's a key thing for a healthy business environment for me. Sure, I understand we need some regulation, let's keep it reasonable.
Okay, we have time for one more question. One more.
Do you think, and this is for all of you, the Food Safety Modernization Act and the impacts that that will have on the farm, but at the same time mitigating risk and having a preventative control issue will be beneficial in the long term to agriculture in America and to the food safety and food security that we have an issue that we need to deal with and address?
Want to take it first?
Well, I think it'll be mixed. First of all, I said earlier, we have a very safe food supply right now. And I think what we're going to have as a result of this act is a lot of people who won't be able to afford to do what has to be done. And it's very confusing to many. And it again becomes an issue where the people who set the food pricing and purchasing policies gives them another tool to control how they're acquiring the commodities from the growers. Farmers are price takers. They don't set the price on anything. Someone tells them, this is what I'm going to pay you, and that's how it works. And so today, the major supermarkets all have people going around, and they go to all the processing plants. They go in, they do their food security audits. If you don't have the program that they want, you can't sell to them. But that program for Kroger might be different than the program for Walmart. And so you have all these folks coming in dictating how you're going to process your commodity to sell to them. And I'm concerned that the new Food Safety Act is just going to increase that complexity.
Dr. Stepner, do you want to add some comments?
Well, yeah, let me throw in we've written several things about the Food Safety Modernization Act. I have one of my PhD students is writing a dissertation on it, and we've written several things for the general public, not just for research specialists. The first thing I'd say is we don't have any regulations yet. As often happens, this bill was so complicated and so convoluted that the regulators haven't figured out how to set the rules yet. And when they did first try to set the rules, there were so many comments, especially from small farms and others, saying that this is just not workable the way you've done it. So they've gone back to the drawing board. They spent a year trying to write regulations. They've now gone back to the drawing board. They're going to try again. So we really don't know what it's going to do because the devil's in the details for this sort of thing. The other thing I'll say is that I've talked to several large growers about this Food Safety Modernization Act, and that they say, look, we'll meet all these rules. You go over to Paramount, he says, I've got guys full-time doing nothing but complying with this regulation or that regulation. And they are in fact sympathetic. They say, look, the guys that are really going to have a hard time here are the smaller growers, and when they say smaller, they don't mean mom and pop, they mean a pretty good sized farm. But they say, the average farm can't hire somebody full-time to do nothing but food safety regulation. They've got actually a farm to run. And it's really hard when you have these complicated regulations for an individual farm to try to do something about it. So the second thing I'd say, that's one broad thing, what does it mean on the farm? I'm not sure it has anything to do with food safety, frankly. And it's partly because the Krogers and the Walmarts and all these companies, love them or like them, you have to recognize they want that food to be safe, because if it's not, boy, they're in terrible shape. You have a food safety outbreak, and you have people that are out of business. A couple of years ago, we had a problem with eggs in Iowa. That farm, a large farm, it no longer exists. They're out of business. There's a melon farm in Colorado similar. They're out of business. And if the supermarket then can't assure their customers that they're making every effort to have the food safe, and we heard, they've got all kinds of their own private standards, and they do that because That's how they compete. If they can't assure the customers that the stuff in their store is safe, they can't compete. So it's not clear to me that these sort of mandatory regulations will actually have any effect on food safety. They certainly will raise some costs. Let's hope if they raise costs, they do something for food safety.
I'll add two things. One is growers, processors, everybody's committed to food safety because of what he was saying. Your reputation is at stake. And, Costco a few years ago, there was salmonella in the almonds, and they had to buy $15 million of almonds and destroy them. So the commitment is there on the industry. The second thing concerned with this kind of regulation, echoing Dr. Sumner, is the unintended consequence. The small guys can't handle this. I was at a meeting with one of the managers from Paramount 2 weeks ago. They have to fill out 535 reports a year. And like Dr. Sumner was saying, they have full-time staff dedicated to it. Do you want to know who the environmental officer for our farm is? It's me. But I'm also the equipment manager, the crop manager, the finance manager, chief cook and bottle washer. And I can't afford staff to do it. So you're going to see small guys get squeezed out if the regulations that come out of this law are not user-friendly.
Okay, that actually concludes our time. So I'd like to thank our panelists, which are Mr. Betancourt, Dr. Sumner, Mr. Prieto. We would like to invite everyone to visit our website, fresno.ca.lwv.net, where we have a vast amount of information about agriculture readings that you might find very interesting. Our second forum will be on March 19th at the Community Media Access Collaborative Building, or CMAC, which is located in the former Met Museum. It is here. I was also saying it for our viewing audiences, and so they might be able to attend too, where we will focus on animal management and food safety. Thank you so much for coming today.
Thank you, everybody.